Ready?
There we go. Hey. Hey.
Everybody wave.
Hi, Haley.
How's it going?
Hi, guys.
Hello.
It's going well. How about you?
We're good. We're excited to hear what you've got to say today.
Me too.
So why don't you tell us a little about yourself?
Let me see if I can make this a little louder, Haley.
Okay.
Say something.
Hello?
I think that
Is that
works.
better?
Yes, it is.
Good.
Oh, that's a big class. What's all that stuff on the wall?
Random pictures.
It's pictures of like 70s. Well, you should show them our ceiling too. We've got Woodstock all over. We've got stuff all over. Well, don't ruin
I guess we have stuff on the ceiling too.
Oh, yeah. Oh, there's my poster. All right.
Yeah.
It's covering the lights today.
Should have some
All right.
T-shirt.
What is that?
So, that
So,
looks like my apartment. So what's the weather like there today?
Cold.
Cold.
it's not
It's
bad.
not decent.
Did
It's
I
not
hear
bad.
cold?
Yes.
What do you define cold as?
It's like 40 degrees.
That's cold.
It's 53.
I agree.
It's 52 degrees.
That's still
That's
good.
nice.
That's decent. That's decent. Cold is like negative. No.
It's not that bad.
Let's get back on topic.
It's
I
not
actually
that
like it cold. I don't like it when it gets too hot.
Yeah, it's not that bad right now.
So, I guess you're wondering why I've asked you here today.
We asked you here.
Oh, that's right. You know, at my age, it's hard to remember. Why don't you go ahead and I'll see if I can share some of these memories with you.
First question.
Can you tell us a little bit about your perspective on Woodstock and what you thought about it?
Sure. What's your name?
Cassidy?
Yeah, introduce.
Say it again.
Cassidy?
Cassidy.
Yes.
So, sure, Cassidy. It's a it's been a sort of a changing thing, partly because I've had so many years over which to change it. It started out as as you might know from maybe the reorientation you got earlier today. It started out as a business venture for my partner and me. I was I had one foot in the music business and one foot and several other feet elsewhere. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So I was sort of a little all over the place and mostly going to a law firm during the day. In 1969, a little bit earlier actually, and not that happy with any of this stuff except for the prospect of doing venture capital projects. If you know what they are, they're just kind of like startup business ventures, and that's what seemed most exciting to me. Guys came to see my late partner John Roberts and me with an idea to build a recording studio in Woodstock, New York. It seemed like a dumb idea, but interesting from another point of view. Dumb because it wasn't a good business venture from what we knew about business ventures, but a smart idea because possibly if they could get Bob Dylan to come to the recording studio, then maybe we could feature Bob Dylan in a concert. And I thought that would be a good idea. Bob Dylan was pretty famous even then. So my first perspective was as a business venture / concert with Bob Dylan. After that, grew so big during the next 6 months of putting it together that it became sort of, it went from being, I thought about this later, it went from being a business venture to sort of like a way of life, because there was no time to think about anything else. At that time, we were building a huge recording studio complex in New York City, and that required a lot of attention, but with this Woodstock project kind of was gobbling up all of our time. It's hard to stay focused on anything else in life. So it was kind of like, I don't know, it was like a boa constrictor that sort of ate you slowly. you couldn't get away from it. Then it happened, and to tell you the truth, unless I've read my book right now, which I do from time to time to help me, I can't remember what happened during that weekend. It was so fast-paced, and there were so many calamities and crises and emergencies and things going on all at once that I can't remember hardly any of them. And then there was the aftermath, if we're still on the perspective question. And the aftermath was kind of, I don't know if you've ever been through something that demanding, but when it stops suddenly, it's kind of like you have lost, like being in an airplane that loses 1,000 feet of altitude suddenly. You know, you just, the bottom drops out of your spirit, and you almost don't know how to exist anymore without all those emergencies creating the demand around you. You kind of like disappear. And that went on for about a year or so. And then after a while, it just sort of relaxed into to where it is today, which is kind of every now and then people say, oh, so you had something to do with Woodstock, how did it start? And I'll explain to them how we came up with the idea for a concert after getting this proposal for a recording studio, and it got bigger and bigger and bigger and so forth. And that's the personal answer. The bigger perspective is, and I'm thinking about this these days because I'm working with, I don't know if you know anything about Broadway and the shows on Broadway, but there was a big one called Jersey Boys, about a musical group called the Four Seasons. It's one of the biggest hits that's ever been on Broadway. And the guy who wrote it, who also wrote, he has a lot of awards for writing stuff that does well, and I are writing a Broadway musical about Woodstock. So we meet all the time. By that I mean 2 or 3 times a week for several hours at a clip. And so in the course of these meetings, we have to discuss, what does it all mean? It happened 50 years ago. Is there any lasting significance? And he thinks there is, and I sort of have adopted his point of view because from time to time I felt it myself as well, and that is that it's sort of a symbol of how in adverse circumstances people can get together and actually form a community. They don't need laws or somebody standing over them with a rifle to force them to do it. They can do it out of the innate of caring for each other and out of the sense of decency that we all have inside of ourselves to form a helping, sharing, loving community. And it's almost, I would say it's spontaneous, but it's inherent in our species. I think it's one of the reasons that we've done so well over the millions of years that species have been around. So I think about Woodstock as being a symbol for that. And these days, when maybe I'm more eager to find symbols of that sort of thing than I was, say, a year ago. Cassidy, that's a long-winded answer, but maybe.
It was a good one.
Thanks.
Who's up? Got a question? Let's keep it rolling.
All right.
Go ahead. Tell me your name first.
Well, my name's Devin.
Hi, Devin.
I'd just like to know when and why did you decide to write a book?
I went to law school after college, In those days, nowadays, if you go to college and you don't know what you want to do, I think a lot of people go to business school because it's so generic. You know, it can almost apply. Your education could apply to almost anything you do later on in life. I'm so old that opportunity. Business school was actually a new thing when I went to college. And so I remember hearing one guy saying he was going to business school when I was a senior at Princeton, and I remember thinking to myself, business school, what's that? In my day, if you didn't know what you wanted to do with yourself, you either went to medical school after college, or you went to law school. And I guess you could also just graduate and try and find a job, which in those days was a little scary, because if you did that, then you were suddenly eligible for the draft. Sent off to Vietnam to lose some of your limbs. Plus the fact that, well, a lot of my friends were going to law school, so I thought, all right, I'll apply to law school. And I got into several law schools, and there was one that was particularly well noted, Yale Law School. Yale was noted for having a lot of people at the law didn't think they might want to be lawyers. I thought, this is perfect for me, because I had no clue. I went to that one. And sure enough, there were numerous people like me there, and one of them was this guy whose mother had been a well-known lawyer. In fact, she had argued and won the first birth control case in this country. And she was as well a literary lawyer. She represented authors and literary rights, things like copyrights and things like that. And he went to law school because she kind of like twisted his arm to do it. So he was there kind of feeling about the law the way I was feeling about the law, which is to say we'd rather play hockey than go to class. And at night I had a job at the Holiday Inn as the lounge act. I was a singer. And there was a guy in my class who played piano, so we were a duo. And I got to know, and the three of us would hang around together, the son of the lawyer and this piano player and I. When we graduated, we kind of hung out together, and then we went our separate ways. And sure enough, the guy who was the son, his name was Bob, was the son of the woman who was a lawyer, ended up not practicing law, but becoming a writer. So when Woodstock happened several years later, he got in touch with me immediately. He said, this is a windfall for me. It's a great topic to write a book about. And I said, I'm up to here with lawsuits and bills and newspaper interviews and psychiatrists, and I really don't have time to write a book. And he said, well, I'm not going to let this drop, and he didn't let it drop. He stayed on that message for over a year and a half, maybe 2 years. He just kind of wore me down until finally I said, okay, we'll write a book. He said, good, because I have a publisher, which is kind of like saying to somebody who wants to form a band, I already have a record company that wants to put out your records. You know, it's like, this is the sort of thing you would desperately try to get. He already had that, because his mother was the attorney for a well-known publisher. So we sat down, the three of us, my partner, John Roberts, and I sat down with this guy, whose name is Bob Pilpel, and we wrote the book. I wrote anecdotes about what happened to me. My partner, John, wrote anecdotes about what happened to him. They're short. They're like 2-3 pages per anecdote. And Bob wrote connecting parts, including, I was just looking at it the other day because we're going to use it in the Broadway show. He wrote, every now and then you would see a page that was a progress report, and like how many acts we had, bands we had booked, and how much lumber we had bought for the stage, and how many hamburgers we had, and so forth. And you could see the thing progress from little to bigger to not big enough to not fast enough to this is an emergency. And just by looking at these almost accountants' reports, you could get a sense of the panic of the thing. And we got done with the book. We put it out. It did well. It got good reviews. It was a Book of the Month Club selection, if you know what that is, and Fortune Book Club with a feature selection. Warner Brothers bought the book to make a movie. And we're doing a Broadway show about it now. So it's kicking around, and every now and then I read it and get a laugh out of it. Although at the time, lots of times, I wasn't laughing as much as crying or something like that. Does that answer your question, Devin?
Yeah, thank you.
Who's up? Let's go.
Alright.
Introduce yourself.
My name's Jacob Russin, and I was wanting to know what the coolest thing you've ever done.
Did you say the coolest thing, Jacob?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think that I know this is going to sound lame, but there was at one point where I kept telling myself, I had been telling myself for the previous 2 or 3 hours that I was not going to actually do it. Thought I would just make the decision at the time. And at that time, I found myself in an airplane, sitting, as they say, they say to you, you've got your parachute on, and you've been trained and everything for the previous hour. And the person who's your coach for this sort of thing says, okay, go sit in the door of the plane. And it's a phrase you never hear in life, because you're either walking out of the plane or onto the plane if you've ever taken a plane ride. You don't sit in the door of the plane. But if you're going to jump out of the plane, you do. And there's something so eerie and scary about just the phrase. And it was that eerie and scary in real life too. And but even then I didn't have the strength of character to say, nope, I can't do this. I was afraid that they would think I was a wimp. So I think, well, I'll just sit in the door of the plane, and then I'll make up my mind. So I went and sat in the door of the plane, and you look out, and there's nothing there except, you're 2,000 feet up in the air. And I said, okay, get ready to go. And you think, okay, this is it. And then said, all right, go. And I did. And I still remember that moment thinking to myself, this is the dumbest thing you've ever done, but probably the most fun you'll ever have. And it was both.
Who's up? Got another question?
I'm Sierra, and
Hi, Sierra.
Hi. Looking back today, would you do Woodstock again?
Sierra, that is a great question. It's okay if I can fudge the answer a little bit, because obviously I've been invited to dinner so many times, and I have the honor of speaking to you guys today, and not because I'm so good looking, but because somebody left, but because of Woodstock. And so it has been, because it turned out to be such a big deal among a certain group of people, it made a big difference in my life. So to subtract something like that right now, I can't guess at how it would affect my life, but it would probably be dramatic. And of course, you get the time travel thing, and you get all those other philosophical questions. But I think the fudge part would be, I'd like to have done it a little differently. There are some elements of it which I find sort of contrary and mean-spirited right now. For example, I have some issues with one of my partners who knew a lot more about getting his face in front of the camera and taking credit for everything while we were all working on this project, and used that advantage later on against us and against the rest of us. And that's being resolved now because he doesn't really have any other leverage in the company except that. But that's still something. And we're working it out, and it'll work out to all of our benefits, and maybe everybody be happy with the results. But if I wouldn't have allowed certain things to go on that I thought were benign and trivial at the time. But I know more now about how people regard events like this and how important it is to make sure that the reality of the event is clear to everybody, especially the media. Media turns out, as we have seen over the last year, to be so important in what we think about the world and the people in the world. In terms of the event itself, it was fraught with danger, not just for us financially, and those perils actually materialized. We were in deep financial trouble after the event. Luckily, we had a movie and a record of the event, which made back all of the money we lost. But it was also dangerous for the 500,000 kids who were there. And it could have been a lot worse. There was a moment when I got a call from the chief electrician at the site, who said to me, this was, I forget what night it was, I think it was Saturday, and it was late. And he said, with all the rain we've been having and all of the unanticipated traffic and people moving around, 500,000, well, 1 million feet, 500,000 times 2, all shuffling around over in front of the stage in that area. The high voltage cables that we have taking electricity from off-site onto the site and to the stage, containing, I think, 50,000 volts. Those cables, which we buried 3 weeks ago, have come unearthed from all this traffic, and now the kids are walking on the cables themselves and starting to wear away the insulation on the cables from the foot traffic. And if we don't shut the power down to the stage, and with all these wet bodies pressed together, we could have, use the polite phrase, a mass electrocution. So should I shut the power down? Now, where I was and the decisions we were making were all based on the theory that the more entertainment we provided for a crowd that was 100 times bigger than we expected, the more the safer it would be for everybody, because there'd be less opportunity to get into other kinds of trouble. So I had been spending my time getting the managers of the bands to get their bands to play double sets and triple sets so that everything would go longer, so there would never be a time when there wasn't entertainment and something for the kids to do. And so for the electrician asked me to shut down on Saturday night was so unthinkable that I said, we can't do it. We need another solution. He said, do you want to take this chance? And I said, well, think about it and let me know if there's any. And calls me back a little while later and says, if you give me 30 minutes, I might be able to run a bypass from here to around there, to around the worn out part to the stage. And I said, go ahead and do it. But for 30 minutes, I sat there. That was a long 30 minutes, let's put it that way, because I knew what the downside was. I don't even know if I would have made that same decision again today. I think if I did it again, I would try to make sure that no such possibilities could arise. It's difficult to do. We started with a cow pasture, and in the matter of we had a city that was the 3rd largest city in New York State. Now those cities usually take hundreds of years to grow into existence, so it's difficult to do such a thing without having flaws. That was a big flaw, and that would have been a really tragic flaw if something bad had happened. Would I do it again if If somebody said everything's gonna be the same, and you're gonna get to that moment again, you're gonna get the same call from the chief electrician, you're gonna have to make the same decision, would you do it? I would say, no, I'd rather not do the event. That decision haunts me, even though it came out okay. Because even today, I'm not sure I made the right call. I mean, I made the right call from the outcome, but was it the right thing to do? I'm not sure it was. Sarah, does that answer your question?
Yep.
Who's up? We got one right here.
My name's Sheridan.
Say it again.
Sheridan.
Coincidence drop out every time you say it, so try it again.
Sheridan.
All right, still didn't get it. So can you spell it?
Yeah. SHERIDAN.
Sure. Okay, great. Thanks.
If there's one thing, like life lesson or moral that came out of Woodstock that you learned, what would it be that you could tell us so we could learn from that maybe at that age, kind of? This makes sense what I'm asking.
I thought it was a great question.
You know, I'm so used to talking to groups like this, and they're older and sometimes younger, believe it or not, mostly older. It's so unusual to get the kind of questions I'm getting today. I don't know, these are really good questions. And I say good, they're provocative in the sense that I can't do them on automatic pilot. I actually have to think and feel the answers. I appreciate it. Thank you for being so thoughtful about this. It's stuff that helps me come away with this increased sense of what went on in 1969, and also a better understanding of where I am today because of it. Thanks to your questions. And I didn't say all of that, Sheridan, just to stall for time. My looking back on it all, and I have a lot to look back on, and not just Woodstock. I think there's that old joke about the Swami who thinks and meditates on a cliff in the Himalayas or whatever for 50 years until finally he has distilled the meaning of life down to one word, and this guy climbs up the cliff to ask the Swami, because he's so desperate for it. And the Swami goes, yeah, it's one word, but I can't remember what that word is. It's the same thing here. There's this one sentence that keeps coming back to me. I think I could distill it into this. The only mistake you can really make in life is doing nothing. It's sitting still. It's not putting that foot forward one step, and then another step, and then another step. And it's like, if you have the confidence in yourself to go from the airport hangar to the plane, and then to the plane to the door of the plane, and so on, and so, to use the previous example. And the other examples, the countless examples, and I'm sure you each have those examples in your own life, where you can't really face that goal or even imagine it clearly enough to see how you're going to get there, but you can imagine the next step. It's not taking that next step all the time, even if it's just to, if you take a step forward to keep from falling on your face, even that kind of a step. Just there's something about the moving forward and then making the adjustments you need to make with the new reality that taking that step has created. Because it's always new. There are things that you find out when you take that step that you didn't know before, and some of them aren't great, and some of them are wonderful, and you have to deal with all of it, and then you take another step, and it's on and on like that. The only thing you can get wrong, in my opinion, is not taking the steps. And I learned this by being frozen sometimes into not taking steps, because I just didn't want to get it wrong. And I think that that's pretty much the only way you can get it wrong, is to do that. All right, does that
Great.
answer it, Sheridan?
Yes, thank you.
Who's up? Give us a question. Get up there so we can see you.
Hi,
You guys get in line, go ahead and get up.
I'm Taylor.
Okay, Taylor.
Hi, Taylor.
So you
So how did you get the word out about the festival without the use of social media? Sorry.
Yeah, repeat that for him.
Did you hear that?
I got it.
Okay.
Sorry.
It was there were four of us, and the fourth guy, who's not as well known as the three of us, his name was Artie. Is Artie. He lives in Florida. His job before he came to work on as one of the partners in Woodstock was to promote records. These records are I don't think they still call them records today. I mean, they're songs that were on actual things that look like compact discs, only they weren't made out of metal. And his job was to go around to radio stations and convince the DJs at the radio stations to play the record, because his record company, Capitol Records, a recording company, owned the contract on these bands. Is that somebody beeping?
Oh, it was the bell. It's all good.
And so Artie's job was to get airplay, it's called, for the bands that his record company had contracts with, and make them more popular, because then they'd have a bigger audience. People would go out and buy the record at the record store because they heard it on the radio. Now, this wasn't always the most attractive line of work, because sometimes he had to offer incentives to the DJ to play that record as opposed to some other record, and that got into sort of a bidding war. But Artie knew about publicity, and he knew about advertising. He knew that sort of thing, because that was kind of his work before he came to Woodstock. And he was the one who suggested that we place advertising in what was called the underground media. Mostly these were liberal newspapers. They were sometimes a couple of pages long, and they were in the they'd be handed out sometimes for free just because of the advertising. On the corner of Greenwich Village in Manhattan, and some of the other more or less counterculture hangouts all around the East and West Coast. The college circuit also, college newspapers and so forth, was another way that we got the word out. And the radio stations also talked about the festival. And you're absolutely right, there was no Facebook, and couldn't text message about it, and there was no WeChat and any of these other things that are just second nature today, to be tweeting somebody about something, and so you think it's always been there, but it wasn't. And so we relied totally on word of mouth. And word of mouth turned out to be incredibly effective. We had 7 million people trying to get to the festival. Is that it? Is that?
Yeah, thanks. Good answer. Keep going.
My name's Trevor.
Hi, Trevor.
Is there anything that you've been a part of that has been significant to your career since Woodstock?
Can you say it again?
Sorry. Is there anything that you have been a part of that has been significant to your career since Woodstock?
Well, it's after Woodstock, the focus, because it turned into such a successful project here in Manhattan, was the recording studios that we had been building before Woodstock took place. and actually the reason we started Woodstock in the first place, as you remember, these guys came to us with an idea for a recording studio. So that venture, which was called Media Sound Studios, was pretty much the hot place to record in Manhattan during the 70s for an entire decade. That's a very long run for a recording studio. Following that, my partner and I got into something called leverage buyouts, where we bought and sold companies that at a pretty large level in terms of these were multi-million-dollar companies, and the transactions were very complicated. So it took a lot of thinking and a lot of financial maneuvering and a lot of ingenuity to do these projects, and a lot of research to make sure that we got the right ones instead of ones with hidden problems. Those were like puzzles to solve, and that was over the next 10 or 15 years. All of those ventures were as much fun and as exciting in their way as Woodstock was. None of them got the newspaper coverage that Woodstock got. Nothing that I did after that would ever was featured in the New York Times as "Nightmare in the Catskills." That was a headline, and that was my nightmare. I built a nightmare. The rest of it was less media worthy, but more fun in terms of business.
Another question?
Hi, I'm Abby. I've heard, or there's been rumors about another Woodstock happening. Do you know if that's actually true, or are you involved with it?
Well, one of the other nice things. Thanks, Abby. One of the other nice things about Woodstock, having produced it, is that I own the name Woodstock when it comes to things like this, and that's called intellectual property. And I own that. If you've seen you have, because it's on your ceiling. You've seen the logo, which is a bird on a guitar and a hand and so forth. Those are our trademarks. And so, if there's going to be a Woodstock festival, the 50th, and there is, it would have to be us. Yes, you say yes. You never know for sure. We're planning one. Will it happen? Yes. And as well, we're planning the Broadway show. Will that happen? Yes.
Other questions?
Is the next Woodstock going to be free?
Did you hear the question? Keith, can you step forward
I
so we
didn't,
can
sorry.
see?
I was wondering if the next Woodstock's gonna be free.
All right, well, finally a question that really hurt. Well, I didn't catch your name.
My name's Keith.
Is it Keith?
Yeah, Keith.
Thanks, Keith. Yeah, well, he's probably referring to the fact that Woodstock unintentionally was free because we just didn't have the manpower and the resources and the time to build what you might call fences and gates and things like that, and ticket booths. And so everybody just kind of tromped in and sat down. We've had two Woodstocks since then, one in 1994 and the other in 1999 for the 25th anniversary and the 30th anniversary. And those were not free. And but they were priced so that relative to other concerts, they were pretty reasonable, in fact, pretty cheap, because that's sort of our spirit. But if we do it right, there'll be a ticket price. It will not be a ticket price that people complain about. But it's hard to do them for free. And it's possible to get sponsorship that it feels so lucky to be a sponsor of an event like this that they're willing to pay for everything and the tickets are just handed out for free. that happens too very rarely because it's a pretty big number. It's like $20 or $30 million of ticket sales to, or can be, will be by 2019 when our 50th anniversary is. Sorry, Keith. But if you send me your address, I'll make sure you get a ticket.
For free?
You hear that?
Will the ticket be free?
Your ticket's free.
Alright, I'll email you.
Yeah, what does this mean, email?
We got any other questions? Okay, you've got to get a question.
My name's Allie. What do you think was the key component to keeping the concert so peaceful?
Ali, that's a question that has actually taken the attention and speculation and theorizing of a lot of smart people over the years. I mentioned some of the decisions that we made. For example, asking the bands to play double sets. Not that it's something that they weren't, that the managers, as you can imagine, the managers of rock and roll bands are that one of the qualifications for being a manager is that you've had your heart removed and it's being kept in a freezer somewhere. Because if you have an ounce of sentiment in you, you're not allowed to do that job. So when I called the managers to say, would you play double sets because these kids have nothing else to do and we're afraid that it might get ugly here if they're just rumbling around the site. And the managers, a lot of them said, no, we won't. And then I'd stay on until finally they'd say yes. Occasionally managers would say, like the Grateful Dead and the Who, their managers said, we're not going to even play our set unless we get cash. Cash. This was like midnight on a Saturday night for the rest of our contract, and that's not something we had lying around the office. That was a big problem. Solved, by the way, with helicopters and getting my banker out of bed and helicoptering him over to the bank and helicoptering me, and we finally got all the cash for these bands to go on. And that was one way we kept the crowd happy and peaceful. And there were a lot of other little things that we built into Woodstock. We had a baby animal petting zoo. We named our streets and our paths Happy Way and Groovy Path and things like this. There wasn't any way that you could turn at Woodstock without getting sort of a repetition of the message that this was supposed to be a laid-back, peaceful, happy place rather than some highly energized confrontational situation, which really worked well for us because it got a little adverse at times. The weather wasn't that great. There were some shortages of food. There were long lines for the bathrooms. There were, and I could go on, but everybody was just chill about it. And there was a rumor that some people were smoking marijuana, and that helped, but I never confirmed that rumor.
Oh. They're not buying that. Are we have any more questions?
I have a question.
You go ahead.
So.
Tell me your name. Oh, you already did.
Taylor.
Hi, Taylor.
Hi. What was your first thought when the concert became free?
It sounds like the kind of thing that would really, especially if your point of view is a business point of view, which mine started out with months before when I came up with the notion of a concert instead of a recording studio for this project. It sounds like that moment would be like a dagger in the heart, right?
Yeah.
Because, oh my God, here's this great idea for a business venture, and now it couldn't possibly be worse, but because it's going to lose a fortune. But by that time, I was essentially the mayor of a huge city in New York State. As I said, they say the third largest city in the state. overnight. And you're so not focused on the money anymore. It's on, is that electrician going to be able to solve the bypass problem? And can we get the banker to find some cashier's checks so we can pay these bands and they'll actually play? And are we going to, can we get an airlift of some food so that we can make up some of the shortfall? And I could go on and on and on. There are so many things you're dealing with, and you have these crises or emergencies or just demands come in by phone, and a couple of them come in, and as you're solving one of them, 3 more come in, and as you're solving 2 more, 8 more come in, and there's no time to think about what your bank account is going to look like on Monday. On Monday, by the way, it looked terrible. Then there was time to think about it, and it was. But at the moment, it was a meaningless. It was meaningless. It really was. It was an abstract concept compared to the reality of what we were handling. So it's a great question, because in retrospect, and I get it all the time. People say you must have just flipped when you heard that you weren't going to be able to make it back, and we were well into debt by that time, and we were counting on the ticket sales, people walking in. They're called walk-ins. Then we learned there was no place for them to walk through, so there weren't going to be any walk-ins. They were just arriving, and our guests. So anyway, that's what I was thinking and not thinking.
I'm Abby again. We heard there's like 30-some arrests for like drugs and stuff. Do you know what they did to get arrested for that?
Thanks, Abby, again. I'm not sure that I'm not sure that I know that one. No, I am sure I don't. I know that when we hired, we went out of our way to get a security team whose job it would be to keep order without hurting anybody, and without a lot of things that, I mean, when we advertised for this thing, we had a lot of little subtle things in our ads that were it was designed to make kids feel as if they would be away from that sort of hassle. Like you can get to the country where there's acres of grass and things like that, and they could read it to that whatever they wanted. When we looked for a security force, because we knew we'd need one, we personality profiled the candidates for our security force, so that, for example, a lot of off-duty police from the New York City police force were expected to work at the festival, and we gave them a personality, a psychology test. One of the questions was, what's your response if a hippie comes up to you, puts his face close to yours, and blows marijuana smoke in your face? And the correct answer, by the way, was inhale and smile. And so if they didn't pass that test, they weren't hired. And we didn't bust anybody at the festival. It just wasn't that wasn't the vibe. It was, to go back to the previous answer a couple of questions ago, the vibe was to keep everything as non-confrontational as possible. So I don't think, this is the first I've heard that somebody got busted at our event.
Anybody else? I absolutely hate to do this, but I have some teachers really mad at me because we're keeping students overtime right now. But I could sit, and I know they would concur, and listen to you speak all day long. This has been fantastic. Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys. It's been
And
a
I
pleasure.
really got to thank Haley for setting this up, because without her, I don't know how to operate technology. So she's the main thing. So
Yes,
Now,
thank you
more
so
than
much.
that, I mean, I threw you a couple of curveballs along the way, and you handled this beautifully.
Thank you.
Yeah, wait, this is my class.
thank you.
And if you don't mind, I'm going to be using this interview for many years to come. So I really, really appreciate it. You were awesome. You were awesome.
Thank you.
Bob. Bob, it's a pleasure.
Thanks. Have a
Thank
great
you.
day.
You too.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Go to your classes, tell them I sent out an email. If there's a problem, let me know. Okay? Yeah, I think that's it. Wow. He was good. He was really